Welcome to Hadassah International Winter Live Series 50 Shades of Health. It is my pleasure to start our Volume 2 with an incredible event, an extraordinary event that will take really the topic of this series, a journey into the future of medicine, into new realms. I want to introduce our moderator, first of all, Dr. Shai Mishan. As you know, at Hadassah International, we have a network of very committed leaders, volunteer people who support our activity and bring and add value day by day by what they do all over the world. Dr. Shai Mishan, who lives in Italy and travels extensively. He is a Dr. MD, PhD, PPL. He's an active clinician and expert in healthcare innovation, as well as the leader of Saluber MD, an international telehealth company. And also something that you should know is that currently he's part of the Interregional Committee for Innovation and COVID Management of the Italian government. It's our pleasure, our honor, and we are privileged to have you, Shai, Dr. Mishan, as the moderator of this program. And with no further ado, Dr. Mishan, please introduce us to the program.
Information is power. Too much information is confusion. Thank you, Jorge. Today, I'll try to moderate and try to see how information can be power with the help of Professor Yoram Weiss. I'd like to introduce Professor Weiss, that is not only the director of the Hadassah and Kerem Hospital, but he's a really hands-on technology doctor as much as researcher, as not only he participated in the plan of the future of medicine of the committee of the Israeli government, but he's also hands-on on different startups in Israel, talking about nanotechnology and interconnected technology. And I think you will show us later on how that comes to play. I would love to start the conversation today in a way that information at the end of this conversation will not be confusion for us, but power. We will be able to see and to understand what is expected to come and support us from the medical and the clinical point of view. And I would love to start setting the stage by asking you, Yoram, it is very evident that in the last year, all the healthcare systems in the world are suffering very much, are crumbling. Some are really in a meltdown situation. Help us to understand what's going on, where are we going from here, and what is the role of technology in today's situation? Yoram, the floor is yours.
So I thank you very much, Dr. Mishan. And I will start and say that the presentation I'm going to show you today is actually trying to address these issues, the effect of the pandemic, but also other issues that I think have been really propelled in advance because of the pandemic and will be also propelled to advance faster because of the pandemic. And what I'll do now is I'll share with you not too long presentation of about 20 minutes. We'll talk also with Dr. Mishan as we plan with a few questions, and at the end, we'll be open to the floor to ask questions. So welcome everybody. And I tried to say the future of medicine is here, and the answer is that do we really know what will be in the future of medicine? The answer is no, we don't know, but we can already see a few changes that are very, very important into the way we practice medicine. And I should say that I prepared these slides long before the pandemic came on, because the changes were actually on the horizon. And the way we think of healthcare systems is changing dramatically. It started to change before the pandemic, and the pandemic actually increased the rate of change. And because this is because of the funding squeeze we have on all healthcare systems, the rising demand for healthcare, the need to safeguard quality, the aging population that I think many of the Western countries are seeing now, and the increased patient expectations. And finally, also the COVID pandemic that came upon us nearly 11 months ago. Changes, the first change we'll talk about is really the information technology. Information technology is changing very, very quickly the landscape we're talking about. The internet over the last decade, and especially COVID-19 also, increased and changed the relationship between the doctor and the patient. And these relationships have been disrupted, as we've seen during the pandemic. And because of that, there are many changes that came in. I should just point out that there's a huge change here between Israel and the United States, and maybe other countries. And this is based on a paper that was published just now, today, in New England. And this is the difference between Israel, which has a universal healthcare, but also has a centralized electronic medical record on every data on each patient. Contrary to other countries, where the data is spread between hospitals, practitioners, and there's no communication between them. Here, when a patient is admitted, I mean in Israel, to a hospital, through a certain system we have in place, which is called Eitan, we, the physician in the hospital and the physician in the clinic, can actually access all the information on the patient. So as you mentioned, Dr. Mishan, we are actually living in a world of over-information, hyper-information, and not lack of information, which is causing other problems that we could discuss maybe later on. The patient is becoming an expert. When today you speak to a patient, he went into the internet, he explored the internet, he found answers, and the paradigm of healthcare between the physician that was previously seen as someone who's of a high stature and everything he says is automatically accepted has been completely changed. And I think the pandemic has actually accelerated this change. Patients want to control the information on their disease, and they want to control also their medical record, which we'll address later on, information about their health. So what is the technology behind the change? The technology behind the change is, I divided it, is the personalized treatment based on smartphones and the what we call today in our slang, Internet of Things, the treatment from afar using autonomous assistance, and the wearable systems, all of them connected to the Internet of Things. So let's give a few examples. Yes.
Yeah, Yoram, Professor Weiss, I would love to ask you a question, since you are getting into a certain direction that makes me very curious. You spoke about IT, and I got the impression that medicine would be more valuable thanks to that IT, and that's very much appreciated. But can you tell us something about, are we going to be a more meaningful, a more unique clinical interaction, or we are going to stay almost like a statistical number? Are we going to change that, and technology could have a relevance there?
I think that the technology will actually make the relationship at the end between the physician and the patient much more personalized, although they won't be in direct contact. But as we sit here and speak over Zoom, please understand that there are many platforms that will make actually the physician sitting even in a hospital accessible to the patient at home. And as we go further, you will see that there are a lot of devices that will come in, which will make this interaction between the physician and the patient at home much more valuable. Because one of the problems we have today is with telemedicine is that we lack the devices really to monitor the patients. And that's what we're going to discuss now, is really to see what do we have on the near future and the far away future that can be in the long term, that can help us really to create this relationship and this availability for the physician to access the patient to see what happens to the patient. And as we discussed, things have started to change. You know, physician or nurse visits via telemedicine, I think people that live all over the world in the Western world are well acquainted with that now. In Israel, there's a huge increase in telemedicine related to COVID-19, which really has brought this to a huge increase in the numbers. But even before that, if we look, Deloitte and PwC, when they forecasted, they already spoke that they estimate that 1 in 6 doctor visits in 2010 was already in the United States a virtual visit. Please realize also that Israel is a small country. If we're looking at larger countries like the US and Canada, where we have people that really have problems accessing medicine, for them, the introduction of these devices together with the internet make for them suddenly the access to very good medical care much more feasible and much more accessible than they have today. So we're using our smartphones. Smartphones in a way slowly are becoming medical devices. We don't think about it. But I can tell you that on this smartphone I hold, I have some softwares that allow me to monitor myself or a patient the way I monitored 30 years ago when I started anesthesia patient. I have pulse oximeter, I can measure heart rate, I can measure the saturation, I can diagnose ear infections, I can monitor glucose levels if I want, and I can also do an electrocardiogram. So the smartphones are becoming small medical devices. We at Hadassah are in the front of it. We introduced the Hadassah, My Hadassah, where the patient has basically access to all his medical information. His medical record is open to the patient. And this is something that will become more and more common. People want to have full access of their medical information. What do we have? We have telehealth, we have My Hadassah, as I mentioned. We can localize the physician we are interested in finding. We have a digital physician and a digital nurse. But what we have even more is we created a platform where the physician sitting in his clinic, the family practitioner, receives a note that his patient is hospitalized at Hadassah, and he can access the information of his patient at Hadassah, and he can join the medical rounds at the floor at Hadassah from his office, sitting in his clinic in the community. So the idea is to create a connection between community medicine and the physician in the hospital. And we definitely believe that in the future, hospitals will have departments that would be partly associated with providing community medicine to their patients, increasing the connection between the hospital and the community. Shai, shall we continue?
Yeah, I much appreciate the setting, Yoram. And when I was asking earlier about are we a statistical number? Are we able to get out of what statistics is saying and consider me as a person rather than a group of people from which you are taking a more statistical decision? I wanted to stress the question, do you see any kind of more unique and precise, if you'd like, role for technology here?
I think that the role of technology is, first of all, in the ability to provide a physician from a distance a lot of information. One of the problems today is that we cannot taste and we cannot measure a lot of the information that we need in order to take decisions that are really medical-based, decisions that are really based on information with telemedicine. And this is today one of the drawbacks of medicine. And for this reason, as we address later on nanotechnology, I think the nanotechnology will actually bring the telemedicine and the medicine from distance to another perspective that will really increase the capabilities that the physician can address. But even now today, look at what we have in our hands, it's amazing. Think about it 20 years ago, it would have been impossible. So, and the fact that we can sit like this and talk to each other and the patient can talk to his physician like this, the way we're using today Zoom is really an amazing thing we couldn't have imagined even 20 years ago. Speaking a little bit very quickly about personalized medicine or precision medicine, I think this is another part where really there's a huge change that is coming upon us. And the reason is that we were able, over the past 40 years, to open up the book, which is actually the book where all the information about how we are and how we function is actually being written. And our ability to write this allows us basically to understand both diseases, and in that way also allows us to intervene. And I want to make a point that when we point about personalized medicine today, we usually think about targeting cancer or targeting inflammatory processes, but that's not where it's going to stay. In fact, personalized medicine will allow us to introduce a new preventive diagnostic service. We will be able to identify cancers and diseases much earlier than we think. And by this way, we'll be able to intervene. And the way many people think, cancer, for an example, most probably within 20 to 30 years will become a completely chronic disease which will be treated by personalized medical treatments, medications that actually target the specific genes or the specific proteins that cause the cancer, stop them, break the circle of cancer, and allow people to continue to live a normal life. In a way, a little bit like we've done with HIV/AIDS. Another perspective.
So you mean that we will die less and less immediately from cancer, I guess, right?
Definitely, and this goes also with our expectations that our longevity is going to continue to increase. So if we speak about what is our longevity, remember that after the Second World War, when people introduced the pensions after the Second World War, the age was 65. And today in Israel, we're living to 80, 82 years old. So, and we expect this to continue to increase. And not only to increase, but we expect also the quality of life to continue to increase and to be better and better as we become older, because of our preventive interventions that we can introduce today, and we'll be able to introduce even furthermore in the future.
So it sounds like fantascience. And before I let you go to the regenerative medicine, I have a question from the audience related to a point you actually mentioned earlier. And you said, you know, with telemedicine, we can connect. You have the doctor in the hospital. You can have his own doctors coming in and the patient is in the middle. And there was more an organizational question. How do you pay all these doctors? Is that just a part of the plan, or there is, in your experience, something else? So I think it's a pragmatic question, very spot on.
So it's a very good question, and the answer is that how do you pay these physicians? And at least in Israel, the way it's being done by the way that we are basically receiving approval from the healthcare provider, and the patient is blocking a meeting with the physician through the teleservices, and that's the way the hospital, the physician is being paid. And the same thing is with the health management organizations, the Kupot Cholim. They basically allow you to call the physician, you ask for a meeting with the physician, and the moment the meeting was approved, the physician is being reimbursed. I think all over the world, it will be practically the same, and you'll be reimbursed on these times. The issue that we should remember is, and this is very, very important, is for medical legal practices and for the future, is how do we record the consultation? And this is a major headache. Do we now tape everything and we keep everything on tapes, all our consultations? Problematic. So these are issues that we are actually, and everybody in the world is now dealing with, is how do we record, how do you keep a record of all the consultations you provide via telemedicine. But that's another story. I prefer not to go in. I just left it as an open question because unfortunately we don't have yet everything written down and all the answers. Very quickly touching on regenerative medicine, and I'm not going to talk today about stem cell therapy, but I can't talk about personalized medicine without mentioning stem cells, because stem cells are a very important part for the future of medicine. Because please realize that the moment we understand the way the genes work, the moment we understand how stem cells work, we can actually start to divert them into creating organs. And I truly believe, and this is something that comes from my research, when I still did research about 7 years ago, because before I became director of the hospital, we are definitely sure that within not too long distance future, we will be able in the lab to create livers and kidneys and lungs. And I can tell you that I was collaborating with someone in the United States who has, in the UK, with which we collaborated, who actually reconstructed using stem cells a trachea for transplanting patients. So we're not far from there, and this is something that will come into play within the next few years. Now I want to touch about something that is really something that I like, which is nanotechnology. And I'm also somewhat involved in this area. And I think nanotechnology, nanoparticles are much closer to us than we think even. Because I believe all of you now heard about the vaccination of Pfizer and Moderna, they have used nanoparticles in order to vaccinate us. So this is really a technology that is coming. And the nanoparticles will allow us not only to provide medicine in a much better way, but even more, they will allow us using small devices, even small electronic devices, to measure things that today look like science fiction. We'll be able to measure glucose in all our electrolytes and small molecules that are indicators of the beginning of a cancer. And they will send the information to us and tell us, listen, you have a problem, please note it, much, much before we think. So we will be able to be under continuous surveillance using these nanoparticles that will monitor us all the time. Shai, I see that you want to ask a question.
Yeah, exactly. So I see that you are talking about fantascience here. It sounds like Star Wars. And at this point, the question really is, all technology will start doing everything alone, and will hospitals still need us doctors? Or are we going into the world of machine do all, and we are getting into a kind of assembly line that the machine does everything? And if so, it opens so many other thoughts around that.
I think that, and it's a very important question, and I truly believe that at the end of the day, even if we have nanotechnology that provides us the information, and even if we'll get to artificial intelligence and we'll have amazing machines with artificial intelligence, at the end of the day, you will need a physician. Because, you know, when we see science fiction movies and we see these robots and they are basically humans, I think we are still many, many, many years, maybe decades and maybe centuries from the time that they really will be able to come to the same, to equal capacity as our human brain. And I think our human brain is an amazing computer, and I don't think that at this stage, all the technologies I'm going to talk about are going to replace the human brain. I think that what they will do, and we'll see it in a moment, is they will help us actually to perform our tasks in a much better way, allowing us to provide better medicine to our patients. Having said, robots. So I'm not going to talk a lot about robots, but robots are really, when we talk about nanotechnology, we talk in a way also about robots, but robots are basically the future. And I'm sorry, I ran a little bit fast, but robots are here. This is not far away. We are using a robotic laboratory. We're using robots in operating rooms. We are doing three-dimensional exams using robots. Robots are here, but they are to stay. And this is another part that will allow us to provide very good medicine from afar to some patients. Think about it. Today, in a US ship sitting somewhere in the middle of the Arabian Sea, a physician from the United States can operate someone using a robot. These are things that really are amazing. So we have robotics, they are here and they will stay with us. But what we'll see is we'll see the robots becoming smaller and smaller. And some of these robots will be actually as nanotechnology. Will be small robots that will be within our body.
I love seeing how, I love seeing, and again, sorry I'm interrupting you, Professor Weiss, but I love seeing how you're talking about robots and machines and then data. And we know that with all the data around, you can really start manipulating that. And at this point, the real question is, where do we go with all of that? How much can we manipulate the data? And again, what can you do with all of that? I've seen the big machines, very small machines, a lot of connectivity, and how intelligent, if you'd like, this machine can be with all the data they are collecting.
So, and this brings me now to the next point, actually, and this is the data overflow. Because the more we are collecting data, the more my cell phone is being used in order to monitor myself. The more I have nanotechnology that is monitoring me, there's a basically data overflow that we are finding. And the numbers of information that are being gathered in hospitals today is increasing every year by about 20%. So the amount of information and data we are gathering is just amazing. And for this reason, actually, that's why it's artificial intelligence and the dealing with big data is so important. Because the idea is now not to look at the individual data, but to try to put together all the data from all patients or a large group of patients and try to analyze this data in order to find trends in the data that can allow us to identify pathological processes, bad processes in our body much faster. And this is something that is very important because preemptive intervention is the key for the future of medicine. And for this reason, we are using, and we see it already today, we see digital AI triage. And I just give you an example. We know today that when we have a stroke in many hospitals, including at Hadassah, the CT and the MRI of the patient is undergoing, without the physician even knowing about it, is immediately being sent to an AI 2 or 3 or 4 AI computer software, which are looking at the data. And if there's a pathology, doing a few things. First of all, bringing these MRI or CT up to the pulse so the physician addresses it immediately, sends a message to the smartphone of the physician so he immediately addresses the information, and actually making the time between the diagnosis, the exam and the diagnosis much faster. So this is very, very important. We have nurse coordinators using AI-based information systems. We have symptoms and diseases using AI doctors, locators. So AI is actually coming in very quickly, but it's coming especially in the area of imaging and diagnosis. And this is an example. This is an Israeli company, which is very, very popular now in the United States. And what they do, they are able to analyze your CT or your MRI and send the data to the physician's smartphone, telling him that there's a patient in the emergency room. Now think about it. If the patient is in a small medical center outside of a major city, and he needs now to be using a helicopter to be brought to the hospital, an ambulance, the physician in the major hospital has all the information in front of him, so he can already start preparing for the intervention, to doing interventional radiology. This shortens amazingly the time of intervention. And remember, brain is time. The faster we intervene with damage to the brain or damage to any tissue in our organs is very important, is key for our survival and maintaining the most important thing, which is not only life, but the quality of life. If we look at the data of AI, when we look at the healthcare market, look what's happening. More than $150 billion will be created in annual saving in the US healthcare in 2026, thanks to AI systems. So AI systems not only make our life more complicated, on the contrary, they make the ability of the physician to really pinpoint to the problem and address the problems faster, much more accurate, and they will actually save money to the system. This is the growth. This is the growth in billions of dollars in the economy of AI when it comes to the US healthcare market.
And I would bet, Professor Weiss, that it will not only save money, but definitely will increase the quality of life of those patients.
I fully agree with you, and I said it, that I think the most important with AI, that it will make our quality of life and not only saving life much, much better. But now I'm coming to the downsides. The future is already here, and it is in our hands, as we've shown. We have challenges.
Question to you.
Yes.
A question to you. Oh, I see that actually you're going to touch on that. But the issue is you're talking to us and tell us that the machines are going to think and take decisions. It's definitely beautiful, but at the same time very scary. Aren't we giving away some form of ethical behavior that we are so much used to in healthcare? What are the legal implications that we want to touch on that? And I see you have a specific slide for it.
So as you mentioned, and I fully agree with you, I think the downside that we have with all the technologies I mentioned, no questions with personalized medicine, but no question also with all other interventions that we discussed, nanotechnology, having a lot of information, and especially also with AI, there are a lot of issues that are related to privacy, ethics, and the legal consequences. And I'll try to give really some examples, and this is an issue I addressed a lot because I was sitting on a committee for the Ministry of Health dealing with these issues, so I try to address just a few examples. The challenge that we have is really how we protect the personal healthcare data and our privacy. Now remember, in Israel, there's a system called OFEC and EITAN, where all our information is accessible to any healthcare worker that has an access to this data. The moment you have people accessing this data, there's always a potential for losing some privacy. But it's much more important when we address the other issues. We will have centers, we have lab tests, we have cells exams, and we have DNA sequencing. And DNA sequencing for our genetic data is very, very, very problematic because these are issues that relate to insurance. I'll give you an example. If I have a risk now to have prostate cancer, maybe the insurance company will tell me, listen, when I'm born, we're not giving you insurance for your prostate cancer. You're alone for your prostate cancer. So these are really issues of eligibility and payments that society, and it's not physicians, it's the society, the governments that will have to address these issues. And these are issues that are coming very, very quickly. I should say, both in the United States, in Europe, and in Israel, privacy issues in healthcare have been addressed, and actually some forms are very, very tough and very strict about keeping our privacy. But there's always a fight between privacy and the ability to provide better care. And there's a balance that we need to find all the time between these two issues. And then
the trade-off. Sorry, you're running, Dr. Weiss. I would love to stop you for a second because you're talking about the trade-off between accessibility of data, super important for us, and the privacy or security. And we heard several times around the world, especially in this period of pandemic, not only about leaking of data. Leaking of data can be an accident, and you know what? It's bad, but it's not terrible. What we are starting to face now is more of a data heist or system heist. We are starting to face hacking of big systems with ability not only of stealing data, but also blocking systems. So technically, if I was a hacker, I could access Hadassah and blocking the respiratory machines. So how do we tackle that? What do you think about these issues?
So this is a huge challenge, and this is actually the next chapter I'm going to talk about, which is part of really one of the things that I'm fascinated with. And I'm also sitting here on a committee of the Ministry of Health, actually heading a committee of the Ministry of Health on how to organize cybersecurity in medicine. And this is a major issue that we have to address. And just to give you an answer, I don't know if you remember, but about a few years ago, in the United Kingdom, a virus called WannaCry was able to bring the British system, healthcare system, to a standstill for about a week because they basically blocked all the computers. And this is what we are really, really afraid of. And what we see is today 3 ways of attacking systems. We see computer network exploitations where people steal data of patients or commercial data, but for us physicians, the patient data is really the important thing. And I'll give you an example. I don't know if you're aware of, but the Prime Minister of Singapore, all his medical data was brought to open to the internet because people were able to come into the hospital of Singapore and put all the data open on the computer, on the internet. So this is an example of this way of disruption. Then we have computer network attacks, and this is when we bring the system to a shutdown. And this is the WannaCry, which I gave an example of the British system. And finally, we have computer network influencer. And this is really the problem where we have damage to the brand name. And unfortunately, I will give you an example which just happened in the United States. And this is when you are able to come in very unnoticeably into the system, where you start maybe manipulating the system. And this is the attack that I, as director of the hospital, are most concerned about. Because you can manipulate data, you can change computer systems, and you can affect the treatment of a patient. And this is what the Russians most probably have done in the US government when they came in slowly and sat down in the US government computers for a while. I want to give you an example why we're so concerned with the cybersecurity. And during the coronavirus outbreak, we saw a significant increase in cyber attacks. And this is because using cybersecurity, you can really attack critical infrastructure of hospitals. Please understand, all our machines today are connected to computers. And for this reason, you can affect imaging systems, radiation therapy, laboratories, cameras, remote control and communication systems, and you can also access and change air conditioning systems. Now, please understand, if I now shut down the air conditioning systems of Hadassah, within a second, I bring down the hospital. Because without air conditioning, you cannot operate, and all your infrastructure for computers, all the servers where you keep your information will come down to a crash. And then finally, we have another problem, which is all our suppliers, all large suppliers, access our systems through the internet. And there also, there's an opening where you can be actually attacked from this area. Just to give you an example, spider spies, we know that during the coronavirus, some countries, companies all over the world tried to access the information about how to develop vaccines in the companies that were working on developing the vaccines. So this is something that is becoming really an open door. Now, where also am I so concerned about it in Hadassah and as a physician? A lot of our systems today are becoming closed loop systems. Remember, we're putting internal defibrillators to patients that are having life-threatening that have life-threatening changes in their heart rate. Please remember that if I go and change a defibrillator and stop it from working, a patient can die. Please remember that if I have an ICU setting, and I'm an ICU physician, and I now have a monitor, and to the monitor I have a pump connected, and now I'm intervening with this pump, and I'm giving the patient the dose of drug 10 times more than he should get it, I'm killing a patient. All this can be done from afar, because the more we're using computer systems to treat our patients and we're using closed loop systems, the more this can be done. And the corona outbreak brought actually these systems close and very close to the patient. Because what we want is to monitor the patient, the corona patients from afar. We don't want to touch them all the time because of the risks to our personnel. So this is a major problem that we have to be aware about. And with this, I will stop the presentation, and I would maybe Dr. Mishan ask me or others ask more questions. I want to thank you for the time until now. Please.
Professor Weiss, first of all, thank you very much. I think that you have showed us a path to a future and its possibility in terms of better health. It was a helicopter view, very fast. We brushed you a little bit in this type of conversation, but definitely we are going to have several more talks more specifically into this issue. So what I feel personally is that you gave us, with that information, you gave us more power of being more aware of what's going on around us. I would love to use the stage and ask you a final question regarding the most notable situation now about the coronavirus. Anything you can tell us about the correlation between vaccination from one side and the creation of new strains of this virus recently?
First of all, I don't know if there's a direct relationship between the vaccination and the strains that we see that are becoming. Please remember that there are types that viruses in general are having all the time mutations, which means they change their genetic information all the time. When it's less than 15 changes in a strand, we say that it's just a small mutation. When we see more than 15 changes, we're speaking about a new strain or a subtype. It's obvious that it will happen. The question, I think, that is really the million-dollar question is, will there be a change that will make the vaccination ineffective? And we hope this wouldn't happen. However, I think that even if we vaccinate and there's strains that are becoming somewhat different, I think that having the antibodies, thanks to the vaccination, most probably may provide us an important safeguard in the fact, by the way, that they may attenuate the level of the disease. So I would say that if I have to choose today whether to vaccinate someone, I would say definitely, if there's no contraindication, someone should be vaccinated, the faster the possible. And the answer is, how long will the vaccination work for us is a million-dollar question. Will it work for 2 months because suddenly we'll have a strain that will be resistant to the vaccination? Possibly. Will the vaccination provide us partial protection? Possible also. Will it be good for our entire lives? We don't know yet. We're dealing with this disease for less than 9 months. So it's really, we're facing still a lot of unknown issues that are open. And I think the amazing thing actually is the fact that we as humans, thanks to the technology we have today, were able to develop a vaccine in such a speed. A virus that was diagnosed, came into life maybe 12 months ago or 14 months ago, because it started in China earlier, 2 months earlier than we knew about it. And by less than a year, we had already a vaccine, is amazing. And this is something that shows also, if we're talking about technology, I think this is an amazing feat. In talking about using mRNA to vaccinate us, which has a lot of potential, and recreating it in nanoparticles is amazing. I think this is really bringing the future of medicine close to us, to our everyday life. And it's an amazing feat that as humans, we were able to do that.
I love what you're saying in terms of the fact that this is probably the biggest ever research done in the world, where we have a nanotherapy at the end of the day, or a genetic therapy in some way on such a big population. The two questions here are, when do you think we will start be able to give feedbacks or results of this big research, or big situation that we are tackling with? And the second is, do you think that will accelerate the genetic therapy in general with this type of technology?
The answer is that there's a possibility. However, on the contrary, I think using mRNA using mRNA actually is very important, because contrary to DNA, which can if we would use in vaccination DNA, then we have a much higher chance of having this DNA integrate in our DNA and then make long-term changes. mRNA is a very unstable molecule. And I think for this reason, it's really brilliant that they've used mRNA. And that's why we're talking more and more about using mRNA in vaccination, because we're using actually the messenger of the DNA, and it's unstable. It cannot integrate into our systems because we don't have the enzymes to translate it into DNA. And for this reason, it's much safer. And I'm talking from a point of view that I used to work on adenoviruses, which one company chose to use adenoviruses. And the reason I think that really RNA is so important because it cannot integrate and cannot change to become like DNA can become really something that suddenly becomes aggressive. So, and do we think that, if I address the other part of your question, do I think that this may accelerate the changes in our technology? The answer is yes. I think that in the future, if mRNA vaccines that we're using now will show that they are actually as effective as we think we are now without major side effects, I think there's a very good chance that we will find that we will be using much more mRNA technology for vaccination, contrary to the normal ones we used until now, which were either proteins or attenuated viruses or microbes in order to activate the immune system in our bodies. I think that this is really the beginning of something that will change. There are still problems with that, and the problems are related to the way we bring the vaccine to the patients, because keeping a vaccine at -70 is very problematic. And I think here also actually nanotechnology interventions will allow us, I think, in the near future to bring it down to regular refrigeration temperatures, which is -4, -10, and this will make it much more accessible. If you think about the third world, I think this is one of the things that will be very problematic to bring the vaccine to Africa and to some areas in Asia. And I think that's why also the other vaccines that have been developed are important, because the ones that Moderna and Pfizer have may have a problem in really using them and bringing them to patients in remote areas.
So I think that we can say, maybe a little bit cynically, that some good have came out, even though we paid with a lot of lives and a lot of money. But this is a moment that will be remembered in history, really as a trigger point where medicine really got a certain kind of change, where all the story you told us about technology, nanotechnology, nanoparticles are actually opening a new way of looking at diseases and interaction with our cells in general. I would love to bring this conversation to a close and extend a huge thank you to you, Professor Weiss. I think you gave us a really a nice overview and really becoming more aware of what's going around us. And if you can just close with us, I'll pass it back to Jorge. And the last very short question is, the million-dollar question is, when do you think we will be in control of this pandemic?
Prophecy, we say in Hebrew, prophecy was given to the ignorance. So
Fools, yeah.
I will be the ignorant now because I have no clue when it will stop, and I don't know how it will stop. And we don't know what will happen. Really don't know. We need to take it day by day and hope that we'll bring it under control.
Thank you. Jorge, back to you. Thank you. Are you on mute, Jorge?
Yes. No better way to give me the chance to close this event. You just said, you don't know when this will end and when this will stop. And we don't know that, but what we know is that nothing will stop you, Yoram, and Hadassah, and all the people who are at the front line of building the medicine of the future from doing the work you are doing. Nothing can stop you. And I think that, after this event and after this program today, I think we need to change the name of this series. You know, it's not a journey to the future of medicine. It's a journey to the future of medicine today, because it really feels when you know, in this last part, when you talk about what's happening today, and there were questions about the vaccine, it really felt like we are in the future. It's like, these are the kind of movies we watched 2 years ago about things that happen in the future, when these experts are meeting to find a solution to a global pandemic, and nobody thought that would happen in our lifetime. And actually it's happening, and now we are thinking about, you know, things that we thought would happen in 20 years. And you're saying, you know, nanotechnology is going to come into our bodies and our lives to improve and extend the quality of life and the time we live. And I think it's remarkable that you have, Yoram, in your background, that incredible place that is it's Hadassah in Kerem, the campus, one of our 2 campuses in Jerusalem, and the work that you do there, and it's incredible. And I think we are so proud that we can run these sessions on the future of medicine just with HMO experts, and having, you know, the support of volunteers like you, Shai. I think, you know, you have been an incredible moderator, so we might hire you for more series coming. And I want just to thank you both, and to make sure that everybody knows and is invited to the last 2 remaining programs of the winter live series. Unfortunately, the winter ends, but we'll have more programs after the winter. And we are waiting you and inviting on February 11th. We are going to have a program called iHumans, Age of Photons, which will deal with radiotherapy, artificial intelligence, and personalized medicine, things that Professor Weiss mentioned today, but it will be expanded with our experts with a focus on how personalized medicine and oncology will have a revolution based on these things. And we will close season finale on February 18th with Guardians of the Heart, a look at what's happening inside our hearts and how that will change dramatically, and it's changing dramatically as new innovation and technologies are coming. And we expect everybody to come to these programs, and make sure that you watch the previous programs and invite others to watch them on our streaming service in the Winter Live series that you can follow in our website. And having said that, again, thank you everybody for being part of the program. We keep dreaming, even in the middle of the crisis that it's hard to stop. We keep dreaming in the journey into the future of medicine, thanks to HMO experts. And we expect you in our next program soon. Thank you very much. See you soon.